I mean, obviously, just by doing a bare minimum of research and then reading your stuff and just kind of getting to know you through Substack. I guess Substack is a newer platform, so I assume your writing and your voice goes predate that by I don't want to date you, but I assume years and years.
It's been a little while at this point.
Do you want to take a minute, take as long or as short as you need? But can you give me a little like backstory about like when you started writing and kind of as far back as you want to go until now, but the trajectory of all of it?
Yeah, for sure. So I really got into writing kind of seriously in earnest when I moved to New York, which was in the fall of 2002. Prior to that, writing had been something that I had done, um, I guess more just in like a school setting, rather than I wasn't somebody who was like, I didn't journal or I've never had novel ambition. So it wasn't like I was like kicking around some manuscript or something. But um, yeah, I actually moved down specifically to, and when I say down, I'd gone to school in Boston, and I moved to New York because I wanted to be, I wanted to work in magazines, and I wanted to be a writer, editor of magazines. So I had a very sort of clear idea and plan in my head of how I was going to do this. Not that it, of course, worked out in exactly the way that I thought. Although I don't really, sort of looking back now, I also had the benefit of not really knowing. Like I really had no clue. To be honest, I think what I'm trying to say is I was super naive about how any of this worked. So essentially, I just moved down and I just tried to meet as many people as I could and just kind of hustle like crazy. And I got a few magazine internships. I took one at one of that a terrible. I believe if you remember back from this time, they're sort of known as laddie mags. It was like the Maxims and like that of the world. It wasn't Maxim. It was like a second, third tier Maxim. But I got an internship and I just sort of followed the bouncing ball with that into a full-time job in editorial in this is like the mid 2000s, I guess. And I started off as a fact checker and I worked my way up to a features editor. And this was at a luxury publisher based in New York, that was essentially sort of like a JV version of Condé Nast. Like they thought they were kind of on the level of Condé and saw Condé as a competition, but I don't think Condé even knew they existed. But it was great because it gave me what it lacked in kind of, I guess you'd say, respectability or clout. It more than made up for in opportunities because it was so sort of loosely run. There's a bit of like a Wild West atmosphere in there, and for better and oftentimes for worse. Uh, but the opportunity it afforded was that if you were interested in the subject, and no one else had sort of claimed it, you could kind of just take it over yourself. Like for example, no one was writing about wine and spirits there, whereas and again, at a more sort of buttoned up publisher, you'd have someone who probably has been in that role for years and is not gonna is gonna hold on to it sort of like tooth and nail. Um, but there was no one covering wine and spirits, so I just essentially decided I was going to be the wine and spirits editor, even though I knew nothing about the subject. But I was able to kind of learn on the job, which is great because if you're going to do any job, like writing about wine is a pretty good job to have. And yeah, and I kind of kicked around others. I got into like other subjects. I wrote about everything from I did a lot of like Hollywood like celebrity cover interviews, which is kind of funny. Just sort of looking back, sort of like some of the people that I was able to like meet and speak with. But I did everything from that to like, I don't know, a little bit of like car writing to restaurant reviews to like sort of a little bit of everything, which again, I think if I was at a publisher like Conde, I would have had to sort of pick my area of specialty or topic and just sort of stick with it. Like you're either a fashion editor or you're I don't know, a books editor or something like that, and the two never meet. But at where I was able to kind of dabble in a lot of stuff, and one of those areas was menswear. But as I always say, and I think this is even on like my Substack about page, is that I never set out to be a fashion editor or a market editor. I've literally never held those jobs before. So um, menswear was something that I was always like personally interested in, but it was just part of the mix of everything else that I wrote about. So yeah, I mean, this is my story is a fairly long one at this point, but to sort of not get into like, a sort of recitation of my resume, I essentially stayed in editorial until I was kicked out and was laid off in 2010. And by 2011, I found myself in working for brands doing, but but now writing for brands, which I never even knew that was a possibility until I think again until I actually did it. And yeah, so I have since then really I've kind of mainly been on the brand side, but always sort of kept a toe in the editorial side, and it's led me to where I am today, which is doing the Substack, which was launched. I believe that was 3 years ago. Now that I launched Mensweird, and yeah, that's kind of the long view, big picture of how I got into writing.
So just to get the question out of the way, I'm so curious. Who did you interview any like wild celebrities? Like who's the most interesting celebrity you were able to interview in that time?
It's a really good question. Who was the most interesting? I mean, I think some of the people that stick out to me was Liam Neeson. I interviewed at one point. That was yeah, that was funny. That was just he'd been on a he got if I remember correctly, he'd gotten off a like red eye, or he'd been through some sort of like travel fiasco or just like long trip, and his publicist had essentially warned me beforehand that he was going to be, he could maybe be like a little bit like prickly or just a little off, as understandably as anyone who's gotten off like a long flight or a red eye could just sort of be a little out of it and not really up for an interview. And so I went into it sort of a little scared that or apprehensive about like what was going to happen. And he ended up being like really lovely and like really thoughtful. Yeah, so it was just sort of like I went in with one expectation and it ended up being completely different, and just having this like fantastic conversation. Oh, I think I interviewed Murakami um, at one point, and Takashi Murakami, that is, not Murakami the author, and he had been uh, he was kind of coming off of the a lot of like his I mean his he was this was like kind of, again, this goes back to sort of like late 2000s. So he was this was like really his era, and when he was doing like the Louis Vuitton collaborations, and he was just everywhere, kind of like top artists. It's like him and Jeff Koons and Damien Hirst or someone like that. So it was really kind of interesting to talk to him sort of at the top of kind of at the height of his fame, the top of his game. Like it was really that was really interesting. I'm trying to think of who else? was really good. I don't know. There was a it's funny. It's at the sort of at the point now where I've kind of forgotten a lot of the times like people I've spoken to, and then I'll sort of have this realization, maybe because I see them in a movie or something like that, of like, oh right, I actually like I talked to that person. Oh, I know. A good one was, sorry, the woman who was in, I'm blanking on her name right now. She was like the lead in all the Resident Evil movies, like the former model. Uh, oh God, what was? Hold on, Let me look this up.
Yeah, I know who you mean, but I can't think of the name either.
Yeah, oh Mila Jovovich. Mila Jovovich was really funny because I got on the phone with her, and she she was like, okay, so I'm just gonna warn you, my daughter, son, I forget, which, but basically her child, she was like, my child is sick and I'm starting to get sick myself. And so basically, like, I just took a bunch of NyQuil. And so, like, right before the interview, and so she was like, I'm just warning you, I just drank like a bottle of NyQuil before this interview. And I was like, okay, great. We'll see how this goes. And she was also really lovely and really funny. But by the end of the interview, you could tell that like the NyQuil was like clearly kicking in, because she started like doing impressions of, I don't know, I forget if it was like other celebrities or something like that. But basically, she started doing impressions at the end of this interview, and it's just like the surrealness of being on the phone with Mila Jovovich and like high on NyQuil doing impressions for you. So yeah, it was. I interviewed kind of like a wide spectrum of people, and I really, to be honest, there was no one who, I think I basically, some obviously stand out more than others, but there was no one. Thankfully, there was no one who was like a real dud. You hear these like horror stories, right, of people getting on with like, especially like really big Hollywood celebrities, and they're just they don't want to be there, or they're combative, or what have you. And I never had that experience. They were all, I found them all, yeah, all to be like great conversations in their own way.
That's so funny. They should think about making like a new iteration of Hot Ones where it's like everyone takes NyQuil and then sees how long they can make it until they're making impressions.
Right, until they're like on the floor.
I apologize when I asked. I thought just in the way you were kind of talking a bit pejoratively about this, I thought they maybe had you interviewing like the Jersey Shore cast or like people of that caliber, but it sounds like you were able to talk to pretty incredible people that not everyone would have the chance to talk to, or I mean, most people wouldn't have the chance.
Yeah, it was a great experience. Like I said, like a lot of things of that era, I just sort of felt like I just fell into it. I mean, that's a lot of my career, I think, could just be summed up by falling into it. I'd love to say that again, like I was sort of self-directed towards this ambition of being a celebrity interviewer, or that I even had some sort of background that qualified me for it. Although I'm not exactly sure what that background would be. But I no, I really just sort of was drafted into doing this, and it turned out, it turned out great. Beside, despite the fact that I was just really kind of um, winging my way through it. So. Uh, yeah, it was fun. It's sort of looking back now, though. It feels like a very different time in my life, very as well, of like, oh yeah, the time when I used to interview celebrities, just this is kind of funny to me now.
I always repeat on here, but maybe not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time I feel like that's the best way to kind of come into a career or something is like knowing a bit about the direction you want to head in, but having everything sort of just fall into place and not be like extremely forced.
Right. Right. Yeah. Agreed.
You were saying before, you were sort of like one of my questions is if you were into menswear at all beforehand, and you alluded to having like a small interest in that all. What was your relation to menswear and everything when you started covering it? Like, did you as just individually, like, were you trying to dress yourself well? Like, did you have an awareness of clothing at that point?
Yeah, I did, and I feel like looking back now, I see that sort of seeds of that go back like pretty far. Like when I was, I remember very specifically. I think it was the sixth grade, like being able to get a pair of, I think they were like Nike cross trainers or something, and like sort of the, I don't know, the pride that came with having a pair of like Nike cross trainers. I became very aware. I remember it was around like sixth, seventh grade. I became very conscious of what I was wearing and wanting to choose that in a way that I think probably prior to that, my mom was doing that for me. But I remember very specifically a switch where I was like, okay, like I have an opinion on this. Like I want these certain things, or there's a look I'm going for, and that continued through high school and into college, and it was somewhat. I don't think anyone back then, or if you spoke to anyone who knows me from back then, I don't think they'd say that like, oh, he was a particular. I remember him as like a very well dressed guy. Like it wasn't like that. I think I was just dressing in the style of the the era, and also like what I was into. But it certainly wasn't like, no one was looking at me back then being like, oh, he's a really well dressed guy, or like he must be into menswear or something like that. I think that changed when I got, well, I think there's like two things that really opened my eyes to it. One was I went to school with a number of Japanese people, and some of which are very, few of which are, have remained very good close friends, and they, you know, uh, yes, it's a stereotype, right? Of like the Japanese always being sort of ahead of everybody else on everything, but they really were, and it was sort of like the electronics they had were like, they just looked like they dropped out of space. Like it was just nothing that, anyone had seen before. And then the clothes too, they dressed in, it was like the first time I saw like a truly what I would say like fashionable person, not just someone who is like, oh, liked a pair of sneakers like I did with my Nike cross trainers, but more of someone who is like thinking in terms of like outfits and labels and styles and fit and all that. Like I had never come across. I grew up in like Central Connecticut, and I just had never been exposed to that. Came across anyone who cared about clothes in that way. So my Japanese friends definitely like opened my eyes. Plus, they were always into things like 6 months a year before anybody else had ever heard of it. So they were just always like way ahead of the curve and just had the coolest stuff and shop these stores. Their clothes are from places I'd never heard of before. And yeah, so that really kind of that opened my eyes. Like that was the first time I heard about beams. Like I'd never heard of the Japanese retailer Beams before, and they were all wearing Beams. And I was like, what the hell is this? So that's one. And then I think the second thing is definitely when I moved to New York. Obviously that, being a fashion capital and all that really opened my eyes and really kind of presented me with sort of the level to which you could take this. And yeah, I think I just sort of, again, like there was always like the seeds going back to childhood, but I didn't really have the access. Um, and so once I did, and once I had a bit of exposure to, it became, yeah, I wanted to dress myself well, and I think maybe by the time I did get into editorial and as a magazine editor, I think from that era those people might say like, oh yeah, he like, he dressed well, or he had an interest in dressing. I'm sure they probably would think of me in that way. but that was a change. Like I said, that was something I had to sort of learn and develop into. That was not something I'm kind of like stunting around my hometown as a kid.
Back then too, like I'm sure a lot of the younger people listening won't even really know what we're alluding to. But when someone had incredible style like that and just knew it was almost futuristic in the way they knew about things that were gonna happen way beforehand, they had no internet telling them all this stuff. Like they actually figured that all out on their own pretty much and then passed it on to you. I feel like that type of knowledge back then is so much like better, I guess, for lack of a better word than it is now. Like
Mm,
that type of info is way easier to come by now than it would have been then.
yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I actually think about this a lot. I think about this a lot in terms of music and how a lot of your this is definitely the case for me. You know, a lot of your musical taste developed because you had to be you had to have someone expose you to it. You know, whether it was like an older sibling or maybe a friend who is like a little bit older, someone who had the access. Because really back then, yes, for all the pre-internet age listeners out there, you didn't have access. That was the big thing. It's depending on where you lived, right, where you grew up. Um, you probably had limited to no access unless you grew up in like a major city or right around a major city. And so you really had to have someone, as you said, like you needed someone to sort of introduce you to like expose you to these things. And I think about it a lot in terms of music. But you know, you're totally right. It's also true of uh, clothes and fashion, that you had to find someone who knew about this stuff first and then learn it from them and then kind of figure out either because they told you or because you know you just sort of you hung around, you kind of picked up on it yourself, or you got sort of enough clues that you could sort of go out and um, do a little kind of like digging yourself. And I think that's that term, like digging, like I think about digging in terms of, you know, like, you know, the kind of slang term for record shopping, right, is like going digging. But I think the reason why that's such a perfect word is because it is applicable across like a lot of culture, that you had to dig for it. It wasn't, you couldn't just pull out your phone or pull out your laptop and have the entire world at your fingertips. Like you had to there was a discovery process, and there's also just a lot of like trial and error too. And a lot of times you didn't know, like a lot, you didn't know what you were getting, especially with music. You know, I can think of going back and buying um you know, records or CDs or cassettes or whatever it was, and like you thought it might be good, or maybe there's like one track on there that you knew you liked, but you had no idea, and there was no way to like sample it either. It's like you just had to buy it, and sometimes that works out well, and other times you'd end up with something that was like trash. And but it's okay because you just sort of you realize like, okay, that's a dead end, or I don't, you know, you figure out that's actually not what I like. And yeah, so that discovery process I think is largely gone now. And I there's something really sad to me about that, because I think that, and if other people have written much, you know, very eloquently on this, I think like the writer David Marx, he I think often writes about this, of just how the impact on culture at large, and how people, you know, people's own like formation of like identity too, of that when you can kind of when you can just sort of like pick and choose like on a daily basis. Like I think about like TikTok and the whole like aesthetics movement of like a couple years ago, about how like one day you could be goth and the next day you could be Western, and then the day after that you could be preppy, and then the day after that you could be you know, I don't even know, punk or something like that. Like how one, it's really hard for someone of seriously, but like someone of my age to like look and at that and to it's very just schizophrenic, and it makes no sense because you were so clearly like you oriented your entire life around one of those personas. Like you were either goth or you were preppy. You weren't preppy and then goth, or goth and then preppy, or whatever. Like those two things, in fact, those two things in particular were like diametrically opposed to each other. Like they would never be friends. They would never sit in the same table at the cafeteria. Like they would never listen to the same. Like, you just sort of like self selected and like sorted into like a whole like worldview that would never cross each other. And there's no cross pollination here. Uh, in fact, there's like repulsion, right? Um, but today, the idea of like the TikTok aesthetics where like you can just sort of try these things on like outfits, like literally just outfits, and it doesn't mean anything. That is both like deeply bizarre to me. But there's also something sad about not being able to like really dig into a culture, especially a subculture, and like embody it, like learn everything about it and embody it and become obsessed with it and want to like represent it. Um, yeah, I think I don't know, I uh, never want to be like the old man like lamenting about how the kids are these days. But I do, as someone who has a son, a very young son, I do. There's a bit of sadness thinking about how he probably, but who knows? Who knows when he gets older how it will be. But he's not going to have that experience because of things like the internet and now AI.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think back to what I identified as in high school, or what my friends, like, what subcultures they were a part of. One of the best parts of that was immersing yourself in that culture and learning
Hmm.
all the like the dialect and the dressing and
Hmm.
like I don't know how niche people went, but there was like foods. There was so much stuff that went into these. Then now I feel they're being reduced to exactly what you said, like an outfit or a costume. It's like, I mean,
Yes.
it's hard to, I mean, like you want to promote that everyone should do whatever they want, I guess, and that's like kind of the narrative everyone is preaching these days. But I agree with you for sure. Like people, I liked it better when it wasn't even that you had to be one thing. It's like you got to be one thing. That's kind of how I see it.
Right. Yep. Yeah. You sort of had to at a certain point you kind of had to choose like what you like who you were. So
And I feel like part of the fun too is kind of not excelling, but like being good at being that one thing. I feel now if kids are trying out new identities all the time, how do they perfect one of them, or how do they even know which
yeah.
one like resonates the most with them?
Oh, completely. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a great point.
Backtracking a bit, you mentioned like the Nike cross trainers. I'm wondering,
Mhm.
was footwear the first thing that you paid attention to, or was it like the entire outfit?
That's a great question. I think my recollection is that to a degree, yes, it was footwear because also, so I've been running since I was literally 11, and I've sort of like actively and pretty heavily competed for decades, literally with running. And I remember in high school, it was, this is sort of like this is kind of like rise of like sneakerhead culture, but it wasn't a thing. Like if you said like sneakerhead to some, maybe if you said sneakerhead to some in like New York or LA or something like that, they know what you're talking about. But this just wasn't like a common term. Uh, and so if it had even been coined at that point. But anyways, the point is that I remember in high school at a time when you had your trainers, right? Like literally your training, not just like Britishism trainers, but like literally the sneakers you're training in. You had your trainers, and that was it. Like you had your trainers, maybe you had your spikes. You know, if you're a track runner, right, you might have a pair of spikes. But that was it. Like you didn't need more than that. Kind of like one of the beauties of running is just, just does not require much equipment. And I remember in high school I had multiple pairs. I didn't have a lot, but I had a couple pairs. And I remember I had this memory of kind of like my teammates sort of good naturedly, but sort of like making fun of me a little bit of that. Like I had multiple pairs of sneakers. Like, why would you need, you have one trainers, you've got your spikes. Like, why do you need more than one pair? And it was because I like them. I remember it was like an Airmax 90. It wasn't Air Max 90. I think it was like the 92. Is it the 92? Is that right? Yeah, it was like or no, sorry, the Air Max. What am I saying? The Air Max 90. Sorry. So yeah, the Air Max 90 was like a purple and black um, Air Max, and I remember just being like really into those, but really into those not because of you know. I mean, they were great running shoes. I do remember those as like an amazing running shoe, but it just aesthetically, I remember that they were just like super cool, and I wanted them not because I thought necessarily that they were going to make me uh, run faster and better, but because just aesthetically they looked really cool. So yeah, it kind of started with sneakers, although I would caveat and say that I've never been a sneakerhead. Like I've never collected. It was never a focus for me. I have a good friend, my friend Jared in Boston, who he had hundreds, like literally hundreds of pairs. Which once he got married and started having children, he was forced to get rid of most of them, and sort of just ended up taking that collecting mentality and just channeling into buying mini versions for his son, which I thought was great. But yeah, I was never that person. I did not collect. But I do think that there was something about sneakers, as you identified, going back probably to that pair of Nike cross trainers in late elementary school. That one of the seeds, I would say, yeah, for sure.
I like that you mentioned liking them just for the aesthetics, not the like performance of them. But I remember, see, I relate to this because also when I was really young, like maybe even a bit younger, I was obsessed with footwear and I would
Mm,
like pool birthday money to get like some Reebok cross trainers. Like this is before. I mean, like again, probably predating sneakerhead, but it wasn't even like they were cool shoes that I was seeking out. They were just like Foot Locker Nikes, but I like wanted them and I wanted to keep
hmm
them clean and like you
hmm
get $20 from each family member for my birthday and then buy a pair. But also I like them for the aesthetic, but when I would wear them at school, all of my like classmates would attribute like performance to them and say like, oh yeah, we heard those make you jump higher or they make you like run faster. There was always some sort of lore with kids where like certain shoes did certain things performance wise, and I like that I and you like them for the aesthetics, but then other people would attribute like different things to them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's right. I mean, I think at a certain point, as you know, of course, like people didn't even, if you were into that culture, like the performance just completely fell away, and it was just entirely about aesthetics. Like no one cared. I don't know if a Jordan 3 or something. Like no one cared if you could jump higher in Jordan 3. It's purely the design of the Jordan 3.
Yeah, I always, even when I was really young, I also like kind of saw through all that and realized like, I don't know if I knew the word placebo effect, but it was
Hmm.
definitely like, you're confident in these shoes and you might jump higher that day due to that. And then people associate that with like the shoes actually propelling
Right.
a human further than normal. I like that, but also saw that it was completely unrealistic, and I would have been 10 at the time.
Right. That's good. Yeah, that's a astute observation for a 10-year-old.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, that was probably the most astute. Like, it wasn't like I was having revelations all over the place. It was isolated to shoes at that age, but
Yeah.
it was fun
A
either
good
way.
yeah, that's a good one nonetheless.
So, like when, like we're talking about, kind of an interest in footwear, maybe bleeding into the outfits, but you were still quite young at that point. When did
Mm,
it become like a full fledged, maybe not like obsession, but when did you put more emphasis on all of that?
yeah, great question. So I could give you a very specific answer for that. As I mentioned before, I was laid off from my editorial job in 2010, and I I just, it was the first time. I'd never been laid off in my life. I had no idea like what to do. I thought just, well, I'll try. I'd never freelanced before. I'd heard of this thing called freelancing, but it scared me. Like it scared the hell out of me. I was someone who was raised very much to sort of like, always have a job, just like steady, always hold on to a steady job no matter what. And I found myself out of a job for the first time, and I decided to kind of give freelance a go, expecting there would be a short-term solution, and I would just find another job in magazines and just keep on keeping on. Um, but instead, about a year, so I did that for about a year, I guess it was, and then in 2011, I got a phone call um, from a guy named Tyler Thorson. He was one of the editors of Men.Style, which, if you listeners know or don't know, was kind of this like really iconic proto menswear site from Conde. It was basically like this sort of early, internet experiment in menswear content, and it was super influential. And he had come from there, and he was working on this new project for the Guilt Group, which most people forget about Guilt.com at this point for good reason. But at that time, Guilt was the site. It was a retail site that operated on a flash sale model. And for what that meant was essentially they got access to like overstock, dead stock overstock of uh, designers, and really was a lot of. And early on, it was like true like designer fashion, but it got access to this merchandise sometimes in very small quantities, and they would hold these sales every morning, or yeah, like I think it was like Monday through Friday at like noon. The site was gated, and then at noon it would open up, and it was, okay, we've got, I don't know, 20 Chanel bags for, I don't know, $100 or whatever. It was like some crazy discount, and first come first serve, and so people went crazy. And they were Yeah, it was really successful, and kind of that era, it was like one of the big online retailers, and they had decided they were doing so well. It's this, massive growth. They did so well, they started to look towards the future, and they just said I guess someone, I'm sure on their, finance team or whatever, just decided that like maybe they needed to not always be in this kind of promo discount business. Like what would happen if we just sold full price clothes, right? So they decided to launch a site which has now been sort of lost to time, but they launched this site called Park and Bond, which the easiest way to explain it is it was the American version of Mr. Porter. So you had kind of two sides of the site. You had luxury menswear, and then you had the other site was a heavy editorial component, which obviously served to sell the luxury menswear. So I was recruited to be a part of the site, launched the site, and I got there, and it was this. I'd never worked. I'd never. I hadn't gone through the whole like .com era. I'd never worked at a startup. I'd never worked at a site before. So this was my first exposure to all this stuff, and I come in, and it's this very small group. I think I was like surprised at like how few people. Guilt itself was huge. I mean, they were hiring like literally hundreds of people every month. That's how kind of exponential their growth was. But the Park and Bond team was maybe 10 people, less than 10 people. But of those 10 people, it was 10 people who went on to essentially define the last 15, that's 2011. So yeah, like essentially define the next 15 years of menswear. So Josh Peskowitz was one of the guys. Nick Wooster was one of the guys. Lawrence Slossman was one of the guys. Uh, you had this kind of just amazing, like, murderers row A team of menswear guys, and I got in there, and I thought that I knew some stuff, and I thought I dressed well, and I got in there, and I was like, holy shit, you are totally outmatched. Like, you are just like, you are way over your head here. um and it was an amazing experience because I learned a lot working with those guys, and everyone was coming. Like, I remember, I think it was like my first week or something like that. And granted, it was July. It was like in the middle of July. This is New York City. It is blazingly hot. It is incredibly humid, and every guy's in a suit, and not in like a Wall Street suit, like a cool suit. Um, and I was just kind of like, "What?" Like, a little like, "What the fuck?" Why is everyone wearing a suit? Not that they didn't need to wear a suit, and it wasn't required to wear a suit. No one else at Gill. I mean, this was like a startup environment, so most people were in like cargo shorts and flip flops, right? And then like these guys, these like 8, 10 guys, like a lot of them are in like these Italian suits, and I'm just like where am I? Um, but it was cool. It was a cool. So it was sort of like the guys who ended up being kind of like some of the leading lights, biggest names in menswear over the last 15 years. They're all in the same room, and I just happened to be in the same room as them. So that was a very, very eye-opening experience. And it's funny that no one really talks about it anymore. Like, I think like those guys don't talk about it. And I understand why in a way, because like they've gone on to so much like bigger and better stuff. And I'm sure that's just kind of like this weird footnote to them. But for me, it was definitely like a foundational experience.
Think it's cool and important to talk about, whether you like it or not, just to talk about parts of your past that way. It kind of, I mean, on here it creates a narrative, but I mean, just in life, it's good to kind of look back on things and either critique or pay homage or even just acknowledge anyway. It sounds like fun, and thank you for sharing it when other people might not. That helps paint a fuller picture of it all. Does it feeling I don't know what's a good word, like out of place, I guess, like knowing all of them were wearing these suits and you might not have been personally, does that defeat you or does that motivate you to like keep up?
Oh, definitely the latter. Like, I definitely, I looked at them, and then I looked at what I was wearing, and not that I was a schlub by any means, but they're just on a different level. It was just a different. It was like a real leveling up, and it was like, back to our earlier conversation about like knowledge and like discovery, and I just didn't know. I couldn't even tell you like who made that suit, or what style that suit is in, like what kind of suit that is, what the fabric is. Like, there was just so much. There's so many layers that I realized, like I thought like, oh, I like cool clothes. I like to dress well. And then, you get in a room with these guys and they're talking about like Neapolitan tailoring. And I'm like, what? Like, what does that even mean? So it showed me, I think it was probably at first it was intimidating, but then very quickly it was that eye-opening moment where you realize that we touched on before, where I realized how deep you could go with this and how much more there was to know. And I think in just the type of person that I am, rather than feeling put off by that, instead it motivated me to learn more and to dive in. And I think, to their credit, like I learned a lot just by being around them and talking to them and working on that site. But then it also made me, you want to keep up too, right? Like you're showing up every day, you're working with these guys, whatever. It's a bunch of guys too. Like let's be honest about that. It's a group of guys. So there's going to be like a little, there's always going to be some kind of competitive quality that sort of seeps in. And again, I was an athlete. I have a competitive streak in me. So there was a like, yeah, okay, like cool, I can learn this too. I can be on your level. So yeah, it was great. It was a very fun experience, and honestly, it set up. I mean, that set up the next 15 years of my life professionally.
Without like giving away any secrets, or I mean telling things you shouldn't tell, but did they like embrace you, or were they like kind of treating you like the little brother type thing, or like how did they deal with you not wearing suits like they were?
There was never any, um, yeah, I wasn't kind of like bullied, like fashion bullied or anything like that by them. It was a group of guys of which like several of which are very close friends of mine now. I've kept in touch with over the years, and others I don't see, like Josh Peskowitz, for example. Like I haven't seen him in years, but always really liked Josh and got along well with Josh. Although I think at first Josh was kind of like, who are you? Like, why are you here? Um, but no, there was no kind of like bullying or hazing or anything like that. I think maybe because a lot of the guys did have a similar um background, in that a lot of them were from men that style, or sort of in that were already in the world, at least already in kind of like the menswear world. There was a little bit of like, who is this guy? Because I was not, right, in the menswear world. Like so many of the other creative worlds, especially in New York, are just extremely small, and it really comes down to a very tight handful of people who all know each other. And I wasn't part of that. So I think at first there was maybe a little bit just like, why is this guy here, who is this guy? um but I think we got over that. It was, as a group, we all got along, as I remember it, like very well. And it was, in many ways, it was a lot of fun. So yeah, I definitely didn't feel like, if any of that like sort of competitiveness came in, it was coming from me. It was coming from me wanting to like prove that I could keep up and I could be on the level. Because to be honest, like I was coming in with like a deficit of knowledge. Like these guys had been kind of living and breathing it for some of them years at that point, and I was coming in, having dabbled, but not to the degree. I hadn't lived it like they'd lived it. So yeah, I remember it as being a very positive experience.
I don't know if I would say one is better than the other, but I definitely like and respect someone who is like in their position, like they already know about what they're kind of like placed as an authority on, but I also really like a glow up in a way. So I don't
Mm,
know, like I like hearing that you learn stuff, and then like I guess Do you think you left that job? Like, even if it was unsaid, would you estimate that they would give you a subtle nod knowing what you looked like day one and then what you look like on the last day? Like, would they know that you had a glow up in itself?
So that's an interesting question. I don't know if it was conscious. I don't know if consciously if they would sort of like realize that, but I think that they had to have at least, I mean, clearly, like, there was a difference. And keep in mind, this site only lasted a year. Like, from beginning to end, its entire existence was only about a year long before it was shut down. So it was a very sort of compact experience, but in that time, I definitely I was exposed to so much more. I learned so much more, and I certainly came out of it. Um, I think both from like a personal style perspective, it really evolved me very quickly, but also from a kind of knowledge base. I also came out at a different, much more position to sort of operate in this world and kind of talk the talk and walk the walk, which of course is what led me to. I mean, my next job, I became the um, director of copy and voice at J Crew, and that's a job that I don't think I know. I couldn't have had that job without going through the guilt park and bond experience. There's no way I could have gotten the J Crew job. But like when I after a year, I was qualified to essentially like create and own the voice of J. Crew Men's, and that was not the case the year prior. So
So you said before that you ended up like working with brands, like you were the voice of J. Crew, but you didn't really even know that could be a job before, right? So how much of like
right,
kind of falling into that was there? Like if you weren't even aware that you could read for a brand, now you're reading for a huge brand. And at the time as well, that would have been like probably one of the biggest voices in menswear that you could have had, right?
it was. Yeah, this goes back to like the Jenna Lyons, Mickey Drexler era of J. Crew. Frank Muijens as the head men's designer. Like this was when J. Crew was like a lot of attention on J. Crew, a lot of heat behind J. Crew. Michelle Obama and their daughters were dressing in J. Crew. It's like J. Crew was kind of just this. It was not only like a commercial force, but it was also big like culturally then. And yeah, so it was an amazing position to be in. I did not realize that you could write for brands in this way. And I will say, coming into to Park and Bond, even though that was in a retail, that was a retail business, right? That was a retail e-commerce business, which I don't know if I'd ever heard the term e-com before working there. When I came in, I knew nothing about that. And I remember saying specifically to Tyler when he brought me in, I said, well, yeah, I'd love to like launch this website with you. This sounds great. But just so you know, like, I don't know anything about selling clothes. Like, I know nothing. And he said, okay, that's fine because you're going to be on the editorial side, you're not going to be on the ecom side. But just by being there, I learned about ecom, online retail, merchandising, all product design, like all of those things. And so when I got to so even though I was writing and editing and I was working at for a retailer, online retailer, I still was not in like retail, like really, like retail. And it was only when I got to J. Crew that I was firmly, um, there I was hired to create the voice of a retail brand, right? So I sort of with guilt, it was like, okay, I'm here. It's all this stuff is adjacent to what I'm doing, but I'm still basically doing what I did at magazines. And then with J. Crew, um, that I went kind of full, deep end into retail, merchandising, product design, all those things I mentioned that I was sort of like, oh, okay, now I now at least I get that those are part of the mix. At J. Crew, that was, it was a deep dive into all that stuff. So yeah, I didn't realize you could do that for brands. But the great thing about, again, by no um, effort on my part, I ended up setting myself up really well for that era by being in magazines, because J. Crew and kind of a lot of the other people I worked with afterwards, what they wanted, what they liked about me was that I had an editorial background. And even, it's funny, at a certain point, even when I hadn't worked in magazines in years, like years and years, people still liked on my resume. They're like, "Oh, you worked for magazines, which means we want you to work for our brand." So it was a little like counterintuitive to me in the beginning, but it really became like a strong asset for me going forward.
So I'm sure anyone listening is curious. I am as well, and I have no problem asking a very blatant question just to get a good answer. But as novice of a question as this might be, can you, like, what were you actually doing for J. Crew? Like, what did that job entail, if you don't mind?
Sure. So the job, which was a new role, when I came in, I was the first person to ever do it at the company. It was a new role that was created because they realized the men's business had always been. I used to know the kind of like exact percentage breakdown, but essentially J. Crew was a women's business, right? Like J. Crew has had men's, I'm pretty sure since their beginning in the early '80s, but it was primarily, when you looked at the numbers, it was primarily a women's business. But around that time, by like 20, we'll call it like about like 2010 or so, and you do have like the rise of menswear and blogging and Tumblr and all the things that really kind of supercharged men's interest in dressing well and just learning about craft and all those things. It was you suddenly J. Crew saw this like incredible uptick in its men's business and realized that it wasn't um, kind of providing enough like creative support to all of that, because it had been just sort of this like stepchild to the women's business. And so I came in as I came in really with my uh, remit was really to build a world, from a voice standpoint, to work with everyone from the design team to the merchandisers, to the brand design team, and it was a really incredible, a huge staff and a really incredible team, to create essentially like what does J. Crew Men's like sound like, what does J. Crew Men's say, at a time when they realized this was a business that was like rapidly growing, and so they needed to sort of treat it as its own kind of standalone entity, not just sort of, again, like sort of a second fiddle to women. So it was a really amazing opportunity, and I was able to just, through myself and my team, we were everything. The way I always sort of describe it is, J. Crew obviously started as a catalog company, and they largely were sort of siloed as a catalog company, up until this point. So you had someone who was maybe working on, um, say like photo art direction, right? But they only worked in photo art direction for the catalog. They didn't touch the website. They didn't touch stores. They were very just sort of siloed into, like, you were a catalog person, or maybe you were maybe you were, yeah, you were a stores person, or maybe you were um, I don't know, international or something, once I started expanding international. But you didn't sort of cross. Uh, you know, you had your lane and you stayed in it. And what was really great about my role was that I was across everything. So uh, catalog, website, email, social, ads, international, retail. If I didn't already say retail. Uh, I touched everything. So you could, for the 4 years that I was at J. Crew, if you read, literally, if you read something having to do with J. Crew men's, that was something that went through me and my team, and that was really just amazing to be able to say that.
So, like, I mean, that's a ton of stuff on your plate. How much of it were you learning like from scratch? Like, how much of it was completely foreign to you?
Um, ah, so I would say what I was learning from scratch was J. Crew's specific business, right? How they operated and the customer, even though like I was a heavy J. Crew shopper, so sort of I was the customer, so I sort of felt, and I think that's one of the reasons I got the job was I just sort of innately understood the business because I was like, as the saying goes, I was the demo. Um, but once you're inside, you have to learn sort of the specifics of it. So there was that, and then there was also the product itself. That was probably the biggest learning curve. Was like actually learning the product. And again, but up to this point, like yeah, I'd had all that experience at Parker Bond Gilt, but I hadn't worked. That was a multi-brand retailer, right? I wasn't working with actual, um, designers or people working in sourcing, supply chains, any of that stuff, which was just that was super eye-opening to me because I'd never met anyone before who like designed clothes. Like literally their job was to design clothes. And so there was a huge learning curve in order to be able to obviously talk about the clothes, sell the clothes. I had to know everything about the clothes. So working with the merch team, the design team, production team, like all of those teams, I had to learn a lot. And also, this wasn't exactly like a small mom and pop operation. I mean, this was J. Crew, and at that time, I think at that time the men's business alone was a $500 million business. So this is a big operation. A lot of styles, a lot of SKUs, four seasons, full collections each season. Um, it was a lot. Yeah, so that was definitely I definitely had to intake all of that and learn very quickly a lot of details that I never knew or even considered before.
When you say socials back then, I'm sure this is like predating any of the social media people use now. So, what socials were you guys doing?
So it was funny you mentioned that. So at the time when I came in, J. Crew literally did not have a men's Instagram. They weren't on Instagram like at all, which was mind blowing. The irony is that I believe. See if I can fact check this right now. I believe they've gone back to not having a men's. Let's see. Let's look this up real quick. See if I'm right. J. Crew men's Instagram. Um, I believe yes. Okay. So again, this goes 2012, and Instagram launched when? Was Instagram like 20, I want to say 2010, but I bet you it was back. Oh, I was right. Okay, so 2010, Instagram launched, by 2012, 20 end of 2012, 2013. It's essential, and they weren't even on it, which was mind blowing. So that was like one of the things that I participated in was the launching of the J. Crew Men's handle. Now, the irony, of course, is that I think sometime in the last year or two, um, they actually folded it back in to the main handle. So J. Crew Men's existed for what's that? Call it like 10 years, essentially. So for 10 years, up until that point, it was essential and they weren't doing it. We launched it. They were in it for 10 years. And then for reasons I don't know and I'm not privy to anymore, they decided to end it. So I guess whatever. It's all everything comes full circle. But yeah, at that time, it was all about Instagram. They weren't on Instagram. That was a huge miss, and that became a big part of my life there was helping get them on Instagram for men. And and all the creating the content that went along with it. So yeah, it was, TikTok was not a thing then. I'm sure that's a huge platform for them now, but we were kind of lucky too, in that this is also, even on Instagram, this is kind of pre, I forget it may have, it's change might have happened while I was there, but this was like when the feed was still chronological, right? So this was before the big switch to like the algorithmic feed. And so you're still in this like chronological world, and it gave us, there's a lot more like freedom back then that I feel like people don't have now, because one, everything's got like a lot more sophisticated, but it's also become a lot more um, sort of metrics driven, right? And it's funny to say now, I actually just had this conversation with somebody the other day about how um, it's not that we didn't have metrics. It's not like this wasn't so long ago that like, uh, internet metrics, like social metrics didn't exist, but I know we had them. And I know that like, we had a team that would, do like a monthly presentation on them. But the crazy thing to look back and say now is like, we kind of didn't care. And neither did people in charge either. I mean, if something was like, sure, from our merchant team, if an email performed well, we would have pressure from our merchant team to basically just, recreate that email 10 times over. Um, but by and large, we weren't making decisions based on metrics and results in a way that, if like, now it guides everything. Like nobody's moving a muscle on anything on social from a brand perspective without like looking at the numbers first and seeing what the numbers are telling them. But it gave us this freedom to really do. We were using Instagram literally just as like a mood board, right? And as like a magazine in a lot of ways. And because we could, one, again, pre-algorithmic feed, we could sort of guarantee that you were probably going to see it. Whatever we put up, if you scrolled long enough, depending on when it went up there, you were going to come across it. It's not like an algorithm was going to decide whether you saw it or not. And this is also I mean, there was advertising, sure, but not to the level it is today either. So it was a different world on Instagram back then, and it was a more, frankly, I think, from both a brand perspective and also like as a user, it was just a lot more enjoyable. Like all the things that people sort of hate about Instagram now just wasn't the case back then. So um, yeah, that was the social platform. So that's where we were. That's where my attention was.
There was probably no video, no stories. DMs might not have even been on there yet.
I'm trying to remember. There's definitely no reels. Reels was not a thing. I think it's funny now. I can't even remember if stories. Um, when did stories? Here, let's since I got it up here, let's look. Instagram. Let's see, when did stories launch? I feel like we did stories, but when did that begin? 20. Oh no. Okay, so stories began in August of 2016. I left in September of 2016. So yeah, can you imagine working on Instagram for 4 years as at a brand, and you never did a story?
I would love to imagine myself that way.
Yeah, that's the world. That's the world back then.
That I mean, like I definitely think what you were saying, how people look at all the numbers and that forms the decisions and that like informs what they do next. That might be good if you're extremely calculated, but I also think there is a lot of like good that can come from the freedom of all of it, and like creating something maybe with the slight bit of creativity behind it instead of all numbers and performance metrics. So
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
it would have been so much more freeing, but also it would have just been, I would say, more creative? Like you probably got to exercise your creativity more than someone, a social media manager at any brand would get to these days.
I will say that one of the things that was, incredible about working at jQuery at that time was that if you had a good idea and it got blessed at, say like the Gen Alliance level, uh, no matter what, like what it was, like you could do it. And there was also critically there was budget for it too. Like there's kind of no, I mean, not to say that we didn't have like infinite money by any means, but if the idea was good and you got sign off from the top, you just made it happen. And you didn't have to, critically, you didn't have to justify it in a way that you have to justify now again through numbers and performance and ROI and all that. I mean, we didn't consider any of this stuff. Like we literally just thought if something was cool, we should do it. And not to say that like we were completely immune from, hey, we're seeing that, I don't know, white jeans are selling, we're here, white jeans are selling well, so we should do something around our white jeans. I mean, certainly the merchant team was always keeping us abreast of like, here's what's selling well, we should talk more about that. Here's what's not selling, can you give it some love so hopefully it will start selling well. So it's not like we were completely, this wasn't like mid dark ages or anything. We weren't totally ignorant to all of those things. It just didn't define us. And we just weren't beholden to it. And I feel like with like watching like the rise of performance marketing, growth marketing, it just became, what do the numbers say? That was the first question. What do the numbers say? And then all the creative decisions are made downstream from that. For us, it was the first decision, the first question was, what's the best creative idea? What's the most creative thing we can do here? At some point in that process, we may also ask like, hey, does this make sense from what we're seeing in the numbers? But that was downstream from the creative idea. And now it's the inversion of that, which I think is unfortunate.
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, a lot of people talk about the past as always being better time, but that does sound like a more enjoyable time to be a part of this all than it would be now. And this is just my assumption, but it sounds that way.
It was super fun. It was just a very, I used to always refer to J. Crew as the fun factory because we were 4 floors. I think we were 4 floors. We were on 8th Street, basically 8th Street and Broadway in the East Village. And you just had like this crazy collection of like them, like really smart, really creative people, from the people who created the store windows, who are all kind of like these like almost like Broadway types, like set designer type people who created the store windows, to the product designers, to, I mean, we literally had a color library, like literally like a room of just like Pantone chips, and we actually had color librarians. It was like an actual job. Like you could go and be like, I mean, we didn't because we had no. They were a resource for the design team, not for us. But they could go and say like, I need a brown for a pair of pants, and it's like, okay, what shade of brown? What are you thinking? And I mean, like a color. It was very cool to go into because it sort of looked like you were in. If you imagine like one of those, like if you've ever seen like a Pantone book, it looked like a room. Like take a Pantone book and sort of like explode it out into like an entire room. But yeah, I mean, we had a color librarian. Like it was just a very you could sort of go between floors and see people just creating whatever it was, whether it was creating for web, creating for stores, creating for product. It was just like a lot of creative energy happening simultaneously. It was a very, very fun place to work.
That's so cool. There are a million things I don't know, but I had no idea color librarian was the thing.
I had never heard of a color library until I got there.
Yeah, that's cool. I and I think this will cohesively go with our talk, but when I look at Mensweird, like at the Substack, and not at all to say the writing isn't serious. That like by far don't mean that, but the notes and type of things, like you have a more satirical approach to certain things, which I feel is the main way to get traction online these days. So all that adds up, but I'm wondering if in the past the writing you had done for magazines or for J. Crew, if that had you like kind of biting your tongue a bit more than you would like to, because I assume you can't like make off the cuff remarks or observations when you have a whole like team behind you. So that compared to now, is it a lot more like freeing to be able to kind of say whatever you want now and watch that work or not work than it did back then when you had to be a bit more like tame?
Definitely. Two things I'll say to that. So one, when you're writing for a brand, you're the voice of that brand, right? It's not about you. It's about the brand. I mean, that was a big shift for me coming from magazines where when you're an editorial, your name is literally with everything you write, by Michael B. Dougherty. That appears next to everything that I wrote. Then suddenly I go into the brand side of things and my name is nowhere. Even though my writing is everywhere, my name's nowhere because it's not Michael B. Dougherty, it's J. Crew or whomever. Um, so you literally become this avatar of the brand. And so it's not about, of course, as writers and creatives, I think there's always a piece of us that makes it through in some way. So, my perspective definitely found its way in, but it had to be my perspective couched within the larger J. Crew. Like, I will just keep using J. Crew as the example. The larger J. Crew POV or the larger J. Crew voice. Um, so that's fun, and that you get to kind of like inhabit, almost like inhabiting a character, right? You get to inhabit someone else, be sort of the embodiment of this brand. So that's fun, but you don't get to say what you want to say because that's gonna get you in trouble. That's gonna not sell the pair of pants. That's gonna get somebody to write an angry Instagram comment or whatever. um you're always being very careful to, when you do brand work, right? You want to be careful to represent the brand in the best possible light. And brands by their nature are very cautious, right? About what they say, what they do, because certainly no one wants to be in the middle of a scandal, especially not a social media scandal, which is, we've all seen those erupt around various brands over the years, and it gets messy. And um, yeah, that's like the exact opposite of what the executives, and if they're shareholders, if that's what they want. So you have to really you have to be careful. You can be playful to a point, um, but you have to always be aware of that you're the brand first and foremost. You're not you. um, I think the other thing to say about that is that when I was younger, I think I was self-constraining myself because I I think it was I both thought that that's what I sort of needed to do to get ahead, to sort of like, in order to kind of, I don't know, what's the best analogy here, a way to put this, in order to sort of be like accepted into the fold of bigger publications, more prestigious publications, that I sort of had to write like those publications, or write like those, yeah, write like those publications. Um, and I think there was a bit of like self-censorship based on what I thought other people wanted to hear from me, or how they wanted to hear it, or even just maybe a little sort of like mimicry of other writers or other styles, because, well, they're successful. So if I write in their style or in their tone, like, I will, they're that success will sort of trickle down to me, or I can take part in that success. And so I think I sort of self-constrained. I think I was also, I actually thought, I was thinking about this the other day. I think I was also just afraid. I think I just didn't have sort of the courage of conviction to say the things that I really thought. the observations I had, I didn't. I think I always downplayed and thought that maybe they weren't as valid because I wasn't as much of an expert as someone, or I wasn't as experienced as someone, or smart as I perceived someone to be. So I yeah, I didn't think that these opinions were valid, and therefore, another form of self-censorship. And I guess I didn't, you hear people, I think, writers or art, maybe like artists, creative people in general, talk about like not trusting their voice, right? I don't think I trusted my voice back then. And I certainly just wasn't ready to just like kind of let it rip. And one of the best things about Mensweird has been I have gotten over that. Part of that was a big part of that was becoming a father, and realizing that, like, well, if I can, if if I can do this, if I can keep this child alive, and I can do anything. It was like very empowering for me to become a dad. And I just, a lot of those things, those, self constraints, those shackles I'd put on myself, I just didn't feel them anymore. They all just kind of literally just sort of evaporated, especially after I became a dad. And I just sort of felt like, I felt very liberated to just be me, and let my voice just let my be true to my voice in a way that I never had. And that was like one thing I promised myself I'd do with Men's Weird, was that, like, I was just always gonna be I was gonna be straight with, the audience and with myself, of like, if I really thought it was this way, even if it was like, I don't know how this is gonna be perceived by people, the industry, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just gonna, if I believe it, I'm gonna say it, and I'm not, you know, I'm not a dick about it. That's been an important thing. Is like, I'm not trying to like cut anybody down. I think there's plenty of that online. I don't want to be combative. I try not to be dismissive. I try not to be like a lot of things. I try to be fair. I try to really be fair and bring almost like a journalistic perspective to it. But it is not journalism. It is highly opinionated, but I try to make them opinions I try to back up those opinions. I'm not just trying to fire off hot takes or shit posts, or what have you. But yeah, Men's Weird is the most me writing that I've ever done in my life, and for that, I'm very proud of it.
That's funny. If I had one word to kind of sum it up, or the way I see it from an outsider, fair, I think is like the perfect assessment, because you are like you're analyzing stuff and possibly critiquing, but from a very like civilized point. I feel like you're never like there's no shock behind it. You're not like hating for the sake of hating. You'll just like say something funny about something current that I think anyone could. I mean, even the people involved would probably have to look at it and be like, that's a fair take on this. Like, I get why someone could think that, and it's funny, and then not be overly offended. Which, I mean, I think there's way too much overt offending online happening. Like, people are just coming at
Sure,
people for the sake of like views.
sure. I mean, the last thing the internet needs is, right, more strife,
Yeah.
more. Yeah, right. Like more division, more strife, more shit posts, more, I don't know, edge lords, more, however you want to define it. But I mean, the internet is obviously just awash in all that crap, right now. And I think it's just not, at the end of the day, too. I think the other important thing to say about that is that I'm not a political columnist. I am not I don't know, I this is clothes. this is close. It's just like sure, like let's debate it, let's analyze it, let's get into it, but it's just closed at the end of the day. So you shouldn't, there's no reason to be, you know, um, mean spirited or uncivil towards someone over their choice in footwear.
Yeah, of
It's like
course.
it's just clothes, man.
That's I mean, a healthy way to look at it too, right? That means you can throw your hat in the ring and you can be involved with it, like putting too much stake in it and having like too much emphasis on all of it. Like you're taking it like seriously enough to be a part of it and analyze it, but not like so seriously that it becomes too much and too aggressive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was this like, if you follow, but like this sort of recent, I don't know, controversy seems to like give it maybe a little bit too much energy or weight. But on the throwing fits subreddit, did you see that like 2,000 word screed that had been posted about the designer Evan Kenori? And if you followed that or saw that recently, but it was just I have my you know I have my thoughts and feelings on Evan Kenori, and he's certainly not my cup of tea, my taste. And I've taken some like lighthearted jabs at him before, but somebody posted this like 2,000 word takedown, and it was just like, yeah, and I read it and I was like, okay, like I think some of the points were very, very valid. Um, but my first thought was like, I wouldn't take 2,000. Like I agree with you on like several points. And this it almost felt like in some ways it could have been like potentially like there was something men's weirdy about it. Like when I was like, this is maybe a topic that like I would have taken on like in a different way, but I could have seen it in a different form, maybe being a menswear post, or sorry, menswear post. But my gut reaction was just like, man, 2,000 words? Like at the end of the day, like the guy is running like a successful independent business, independent as far as I know. I mean, at this point, he could be like awash in private equity, but I don't think so. I haven't heard that, but you never know these days. But we'll say for the sake of this conversation that he is just still a very small operation, San Francisco based designer trying to do something different. And I'm like, you know what? He's not my cup of tea, but good for him. Like, good for him for doing it. And like all the success, we make fun of him because Mark Zuckerberg wears his shit now and da da da. But like, at the end of the day, it's better than like Shine, She. I never know how to pronounce it. Shine, Shein, the Chinese, fast fashion retailer who like just bought Everlane. Like it's better than them. It's better than Zara. I'd take Evan Kenori over Zara like any day.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, dude, like yes, have your critiques, but 2,000 words? Dude, like you could have, I don't know, you could have like read a book or gone to the gym or I don't know, had a nice meal in the time it took to write.
Yeah, definitely. When I think about that, that's well, the young people saying it's not that deep. I feel like that really caters to that type of thing. Like, sure, think about it, but I don't know if that much thought needs to go into something as arbitrary as that.
Yeah. And again, just a guy who's an independent maker, a small business. Good for him. Honestly, we need more like that and less like Zara. So
Yeah, definitely. I I don't want to eat up any more time than I said I would, but I have one question that I didn't know how I was gonna fit it in, but based on what you just said, I think it actually makes more sense now than even 10 minutes ago. So if you don't mind, I just want to ask. I mean, we can say J. Crew, we can just say a blanket company if you don't want to attribute or talk about them
mm,
so much. But I'm wondering, When someone is hired to be the voice of a brand that big, when they hired you, was there like a team? Like, did you guys basically workshop which voice you would have for the company, or did they hire you because like we like you, Michael, we trust you? Can you speak for us? And then you're given like free range to speak how you want, or like how much input into the voice you're having do they have?
So at J. Crew, again, because it was this, yeah, kind of like creative Wild West, unshackled environment. I was hired because they trusted me, liked me, and just let me go. And so, that I don't get me wrong. I had my bosses. I had people that, I had to partner with or sometimes like convince, get approval from. And I certainly did not always get my way. But by and large, it was handed to me and they just said, go. Do what you think. Do what you think is best. So I did what I thought was best. Now I have since J. Crew, I have done built voices for a number of other brands. That's kind of like one of my, I guess if you're gonna say specialties, is one of my specialties is like brand voice creation and creating that, kind of codifying that into brand guides, brand voice guides. And I would say it depends on the brand. Some people are going to have more input than others, but I would say by and large, um, people just sort of trust me to do it. I think because I have been doing it for so long, and I also do keep in mind I also do kind of like a lengthy, um, kind of like research audit process when I do these things. So it's not like I just walk in the door and I'm like, you should sound like X or whatever. Um, I do my homework like I do with Mensweird and everything else in my life. I do my homework and I come at it from a perspective where someone does kind of try to poke holes in it or push back. I have an answer. I can tell you why. And sometimes, that answer is the right answer. And they're like, all right, keep going. And other times it's like, okay, great. But, we still feel like it should be this. And I say, okay, sure. Um, and that gets integrated because again it's not the end of the day it's not my voice. I'm handing it off to a brand or I'm executing it for a brand, so they have to be happy with it. But I would say the kind of, I guess, irony is that like when I maybe the first time I ever did it, I did it uh, just off of gut and feel, and the fact that I was a super fan myself. And I had, keep in mind also I had a lot of support from a lot of amazing people. So I didn't do it alone. I didn't do it in a vacuum, but I did it largely on feel and yeah, like taste is like a very loaded word these days, but like what I thought was, in good taste, and the right thing for the brand and the business. And then because that was successful, it's sort of given me the freedom in the future to kind of to do it because it worked out with J. Crew. Other people began to trust me. So even though I started from a place where like I didn't really know how to build it or what I was doing because it worked out okay. 10 years later, even though now I do know what I'm doing and I can back it up with like research and audits and all these, God forbid, metrics and all these things. Um, People still trust me because I did do it in the past, if that makes sense. So um, now I know what I'm doing, but it's all the success of that and the ability to continue to do that is based on the fact that yeah, I just kind of I winged it back then and it worked out really well.
That's yeah, I wouldn't have thought the answer would be that like simple. I like I'm not comparing what you do to what is done by these people, but I've heard like all the fast food restaurants' Twitter accounts have like a team of Redditors behind them. So I didn't know if that kind of went all the way up. Bigger brands would have more people contributing to the voice, but I think it's way better if it's one voice to kind of represent the voice. Like it makes more sense that it would be less people, but I have heard that there's a lot of people involved in things like this.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you are and yeah, who is it? Was it Denny's? That sort of has always like famously had the really kind of out there social voice, right? I think it's Denny's. I mean, I know there's like a couple brands, but I think it's like Denny's in particular that just has this like really kind of gonzo voice. And I'm sure that's because they handed it over to one, there's one social media manager. They're like, all right, you're in charge of everything here. Now, does that voice, the Gonzo Denny's voice, does that apply to like Denny's restaurants? Like probably not. But then again, like I don't know how much of like a voice the restaurant, I can't even, I mean, Jesus, I spent a lot of time in Denny's in like high school and college, but I don't even know the last time I was in a Denny's. But like I can't imagine Denny's is like the type of place where you're like aware of a voice. I mean, because like what the hell kind of voice do they even need? But so I can see like in that kind of business, they're able to be like, okay, on social we have this totally like out of bounds gonzo voice because it doesn't really apply, right? Like you go into Denny's and that's not the voice of like a Denny's restaurant. But for everywhere else, I think yes, your point is you're spot on in that like you want the voice to be consistent and holistic across like everywhere that you experience that brand. So like for example, like a Nike, right? Like Nike's not just gonna be like, oh, we're going to be crazy on social, but then we're going to be like Nike everywhere else. It's like they're Nike on social and they're Nike everywhere else. So,
Yeah, no, that definitely. I wouldn't even thought about it until you answered it that way. But yeah, of course, like I don't think Denny's or Wendy's or any of these weird ones need to worry about their voice on Twitter affecting like restaurant sales, but someone more calculated, of course, couldn't have like an unhinged social team and then like a more refined in store.
right. Right. It would just be like really weird if it was right. Like, we're going to be insane on social and then we're going to be like totally like, I don't know, but like prim and proper and everywhere. It would just seem like it would be schizophrenic. Right.
The way everything is going, though, I think we're probably close to someone trying that. Like Louis Vuitton will like give their passwords to the owner's niece or something, and she'll get insane on socials, but they'll still be like extremely refined in store and on website.
I mean, if it works for them, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. I probably wouldn't advise it myself. But
Okay, like I was saying, I don't want to eat up any more of your day than I need to. One last question though.
okay, yeah, let's do it.
What do you do with your time when you're not kind of analyzing menswear and all the stuff you do for a career? Like, what do you do when it's not that stuff?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I'm a dad, and my son is. I'm the father of a 3-year-old boy. Which, if you've ever been around a toddler, a 3-year-old boy, it is a full-time job in and of itself. So my son, and it's the best job in the world too. So it's a job that I'm very happy and proud to be doing. So honestly, these days when I'm not thinking about menswear or writing about menswear, I am trying to spend as much time with my son because I know that everyone. I started a little bit later than most of my friends, and but I was talking to a friend the other day, and a really good friend of mine from college, and his eldest daughter is going to she's starting college this fall, and my son is starting preschool. So it just gives you a sense of how much later I started than him. But I know from talking to friends who are parents of mine, that this time goes by quickly, and it's always, you always want more of it, and so I'm really trying with that, and with that knowledge and in mind, I'm just trying to yeah, I'm just trying to like maximize that experience with him, and just be there for him and watch him grow. And it's I try to like I try to sneak in stuff for myself here and there, but really it's about being present for my son, which is a joy to do. So
What was the first pair of shoes you got for him?
well, when they're like infant, like baby, like that stage, they're all these kind of just like weird little like booty things, right? Because they're like, first off, they're not walking, so you realize you're like, oh, you don't need shoes when you're not walking, right? And then of course, just the way their bodies are, everything is just sort of something you can kind of like slip on them, right? So like no laces or even Velcro or any of that stuff. So it really doesn't, you kind of have to wait until they're around, I guess maybe like let me see, my son started walking like when he was like 13 months or so. Um, so once that happens though, that's when you start to get into like, all right, we're now we can have some fun. And the great thing is the difference between like when I was like a little kid and it was like, I don't know, like Oshkosh or something like that was probably like your only option. And probably just like these weird, like white patent leather shoes, very sort of like, almost like what your like grandparents would have worn. But now you can get mini versions of literally anything. So one of my favorite photos of my son and I is he was probably, I don't know, maybe like a year and a half, two at this time, but we have this photo of us on the stoop of where our former apartment was, and uh, I have my so as long as I can remember, I've always had a pair of slip-on checkered Vans. Like that's always like you go in my closet, you will always find a pair of slip-on checkered Vans. I usually refresh every summer depending on how threshed they are, but you will always find a pair in my closet, and I am in this photo, I am wearing them, and we got like a baby version, like a 3-inch, 4-inch long checkered slip-on van that my son is wearing. And I have to say, I have to come in and say, like, I'm the whole like dressing your kid like yourself. It's a little weird. I try not to be that dad. I'm not trying to like not putting him in like Wu-Tang t-shirts or something like that. Um, but no shade to anybody who does. But I try to let him be his own guy. But I do have to say, I love those mini slip-on Vans, and it was unfortunate because at that age they grow so fast that I think he maybe wore them like 2 times, 3 times. I mean, these things were like basically untouched, and he already had grown out of them. Uh, but we thankfully we got one just perfect shot of the two of us in our slip-on Vans sitting on the stoop. So that was was a favorite moment for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say at least like, there's photo proof, so even if it was only one wear, the photo is gonna last forever. And I
It's there.
know I don't have kids, but my brother has twins, and I used to always get them gear when they were younger, and the same
Hmm.
thing, they'd wear it twice before they outgrew it, and then at least they would hand me down to someone else. So I guess someone's still got them, but it's a lot of effort, like picking out cool stuff for a kid to wear. They're only gonna get a couple wears and then move on, but can't really do much about it.
Yes, that is the name. That is the name of the game. Certainly up. He's at 3. You can certainly. He's even like wearing stuff out. Like his sneakers now. He'll actually get to the point where they're kind of like worn out, and he has to like get a new pair, which is great because for those first 2 years, you're buying stuff, and then you're literally just like giving away brand new stuff like 2 months later, which is sometimes very frustrating.
Yeah, it's gotta. gotta all be interesting to be a part of, especially being a parent for the first time. You get to, I mean, I guess you did see a lot of your friends go through it a bit earlier, but it's probably, they probably don't fully prepare you for picking out all these cool shoes for a kid that's gonna wear them twice.
It's a fun, it's a very fun experience, and not, in a lot of ways too, that you just can't predict. And I would say, like, one of them is, yeah, being able to pick out your son's clothes. Although I have to give credit where it's due, and my wife is the primary stylist, we'll call it, of my son, and she does a very good job. And people see him, they're like, "Oh my God, he's so well dressed. It must be because of you." And I'm like, actually, it's that's pretty much my wife. Yeah, I have to give my wife credit for that. So yeah.
Maybe, I guess, yeah, you're saying you don't want to impose anything on him, but maybe a bit later in his childhood, you can kind of do a bit more of the styling and advising of certain things they might want to wear.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm only human, so I'm sure I will try to, push him in certain directions, but I can't. I sort of I remember back to how I was when I was growing up, especially as I was a teenager, and just because you love something does not mean your kid's gonna love it. I try to keep that in mind, and not be, when that day comes and I try to introduce him to, like, oh my God, this is, like, the Beastie Boys. You gotta let this is the you know this is the best music in the world, and he just looks at me like, this is trash, Dad. I'm like, I'll try not to be offended. So
Oh, I think about, like, no matter how cool something is, I think when I was a kid, if my parents were the ones that showed it to me, I think that would instantly maybe create a bit of pushback, and I might have not thought. Like, I also think Beastie Boys are incredible, but if my mom told me that when I was 8, I don't know if I would have formed that opinion. So it might be a slippery slope. Like, maybe being as hands off with the styling as possible could be a benefit. Like, maybe then they're not gonna like form any like pushback to anything when it's not actually like told to them.
I think that's the right approach, is that you let them discover it on their own. If they like it, great. If they don't, that's fine too. But they are their own person. They're not a mini you. They're not a clone. They are their own person, and so they get to make all their own choices. And yeah, I completely agree with you. If my mom back then, and if my mom or dad had loved the Beastie Boys, I probably would have absolutely hated the Beastie Boys, just because.
I think it'll be the most interesting. I think when you take him to a store and just say pick out a pair of shoes, like give them full reign over the shoes. Then you're gonna see like what they truly are interested in, what they really want to be wearing when it's like fully up to them.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. I think that day is probably coming soon. My son is definitely forming, has a lot of big opinions these days. So I think that day is probably coming, that we'll let him choose and just see what he picks.
Probably, I mean, it'll feel like sooner than you thought it would be. Like, it'll feel like tomorrow whenever it happens. Again, don't have kids, but all my friends that do say everything happens infinitely faster than you would like it to, or than you would think it would.
100%. 100. That is 100% correct.
Well, thank you so much for putting up with the questions and
This
dealing
was
with
great.
all the randomness. I learned a lot. I had a lot of fun. Hopefully you did as well. I guess you probably didn't learn anything, but hopefully you had a decent time answering the random questions.
It was great. Yeah, no, thank you. It was a really fun conversation, and I really appreciate you having me on.
I'll shoot you an email just with asset requests and stuff, but there isn't
Okay.
too much involved after this. This is kind of the hard part.
Sounds good. Yeah, hit me up. I'll get you anything you need.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thanks, Wesley.
Have a good day. Peace.
Thanks. Bye.